For that. Well, let's get more insight into this issue and talk to Kingston Reif. He's also there in Washington. He's a director at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. Well, despite the Duma's approval of the treaty, the contentious issue of the European missile defense shield is still lingering, isn't it? The US position on that, is it likely to change?
Well, I think it's important to remember that during the negotiations of the New START treaty, the U.S. and Russia kept the issue of missile defense on a separate track from the issue of reductions in strategic nuclear forces. So the U.S. position has long been, and I think this is borne out by the actual text of the treaty, that there are no meaningful limits on U.S. missile defense programs in New START. And nothing that the Russians are going to say will really change the U.S. position on that. Now, I haven't seen the full final text of the Duma's ratification law, but I did see an earlier draft of it. And as far as I can tell, the provisions on missile defense that the Duma inserted are much tamer than some critics here in the U.S. are making it out to be. I mean, they simply reiterated positions on missile defense that they stated in the unilateral statement that they issued along the New START treaty and in other correspondence with the U.S. And there really isn't anything that the Russians have said that is going to change the U.S. interpretation on missile defense.
But there is an air of compromise, isn't there? NATO not long ago said that Russia should be included in plans for anti-missile defense in Europe. I mean, do you see one day that Russia could actually be part of the whole system?
Well, obviously that is a long-term goal, and the Obama administration has picked up negotiations to that effect that had begun under the George W. Bush administration and even administrations prior to that. So the U.S. and Russia, and in conjunction with NATO as well, are trying to work together to see ways in which they can try and safeguard themselves from the threat posed by rogue state ballistic missiles.
Now, do you think this START treaty is going to last for a long time? I understand that under some circumstances both countries can actually exit this agreement, but what are your thoughts for the longevity of this agreement?
Well, I think the treaty will last for the entire duration as set out in the actual text. The treaty is supposed to be in force for 10 years when it does actually enter into force. And the treaty is so overwhelmingly in the national security interests of both the U.S. and Russia because of the predictability, transparency, and stability that the provisions in the treaty are going to bring to the relationship that I see no way in which either the U.S. or Russia would pull out of the treaty. And just to go back for a very brief second on the missile defense issue, there's been a lot of consternation among some observers that the Russians have said that they could withdraw from the treaty if the U.S. builds up its missile defense programs. But the Russians have been very clear from the beginning that the only circumstance under which they would consider withdrawing from the treaty because of missile defense is if the missile defenses posed a threat to their strategic nuclear deterrent. And the U.S. has made it abundantly clear that it has no intention or desire to threaten Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent. And to add to that, it will not even have the technology to do so, even if it wanted to, within the actual life of the treaty.
Just finally, being from the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, you must be delighted by this step. But is it really realistic, as Obama wants, and clearly what you want, to have a world without nuclear weapons? So some saying this is the first step towards it, but isn't that naive?
Well, obviously, as the president has made abundantly clear, he doesn't think a world without nuclear weapons is something that's going to be achieved in his lifetime. But there are a number of steps that we can take prior to even conceiving of a world without nuclear weapons, common sense steps that would reduce the threat posed by nuclear weapons. And I think New START is a very important step in that direction. Now, it's a very modest step. Both sides are still going to have at least 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads at their disposal under the treaty, which is why the U.S. and Russia should try to build on the momentum created by the signature and then ratification of New START to take even further steps to reduce the number and role of nuclear weapons in the respective national security strategies, because even 1,550 nuclear warheads more than 20 years after the Cold War is way too many.
Kingston Reif, Director of Nuclear Non-Proliferation at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation there in Washington. Thanks for your time on RT.